See everyone here today. So my name is Birju Pandya. I work with Armonia, and Armonia has been one of the supporters of Savory Institute for several years now, and I feel very grateful for the opportunity to play the role of one of the MCs today. I'm just going to pull this up a little bit. So as we get started, this is the second annual Savory Institute conference in London this year, and because it's in London, we thought it only fitting to invite a host for this particular venue, the Countess of Mar. And as a bit of background about her approach, she's a longtime member of Parliament, and one of her key focuses is on agriculture and animals. So definitely an appropriate choice for welcoming us all. Please welcome the Countess.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me huge pleasure to welcome so many of you here to the Savory Institute's conference. I'm doing this on behalf of Alan and Jodie, and I think all of you who know Daniela will know how persuasive she is. And I'm afraid my arm is right up my back at the moment. She's asked me to tell you the reasons why I happen to be here today. I first met Alan about 3 or 4 years ago at a meeting in the House of Lords of the all-party parliamentary group on overseas food and development. And he only spoke very briefly, but what he said struck a chord. And I remember my own upbringing in Kenya on a farm there, and how parts of Kenya now are becoming desert because of the way agriculture was done there. And we tried to get Alan to come to a meeting of the food and development people, but they like big tractors and monocrops and all these sorts of things. And so I'm also a co-chair of the agroecology group in the Houses of Parliament. And we got Alan to come and address us, and he came. And unfortunately, we had no members of Parliament, but we had many members of the public. So I'm hoping that those of you who are here today will do what those people who came to that meeting. We're all converted here, that's why we're here. But we need to go out and spread the message to as many people as we possibly can. And I came to this because I've always been associated with farming. I was brought up on a farm. I first worked on farms when I left school. And then in 1982, I married a man who could keep me in the manner to which I'd like to be accustomed. And we have a small farm. And when he took it over, it was in a terrible state. It was full of ragwort. There were no fences on, and we were determined to leave the land in better heart than we found it. And we're doing that gradually. We grow better grass than anybody else in the district with no pesticides, no fertilizers. It's just purely and simply a sensible grazing regime. And this, again, is why it struck a chord with me. And in the House of Lords, I'm very much aware of what's going on, what's happening to our soil, with the multiple chemicals that we put on, with pesticides and fertilizers. And we don't replace, because we know many farms no longer have animals, and we don't replace the trace elements and minerals that are necessary for our own well-being. And I don't know whether you're aware of it, but glyphosate, which is in Roundup, is a very powerful chelator. It locks in numerous trace elements and minerals. So that's not getting into the plants, and it's not getting into our feed, and it is beginning to show in our own health. And I remember when I was young, most of you are too young to remember it, there used to be a guy called Fred Streeter on Gardener's Question Time, and he always used to say, the answer lies in the soil. And that is right. Without good, healthy soil, we're not going to have any food in the future. So I hope you will all listen to Alan and to all the other speakers. We've got a wonderful array of speakers, and that you will all be able to go out convinced of the story that Alan has, and see if we can't change things before it's too late. So please enjoy the conference.
Thank you, Countess. So we'd like to move to the opening remarks of this conference, shared by Daniela Howell. You guys will know her as the Executive Director of Savory Institute. She's the guide of the global conversation on holistic management that is now happening all over the world in some of the most powerful places that I know of. And she's also the architect for this particular gathering. Please help me in welcoming Daniela.
Thank you. I was expecting 650 people. That's what I told my team, six months ago, 8 months ago. We are around to 50, so we need to fill more seats out there. Thank you so much for being here. It could not be possible for all of us to be here having these conversations without the support of our conference sponsors. Thank you so much, and our main donors who are facilitating not only these conversations, but the ability for all of us to learn from each other, network, and begin forming this global network we have set to support. So thank you very much for all of you being here. Special thanks to our sponsors and donors. And to all of you, our guests, we have with us represented in this room our global network. What we think every one of you plays such an important role in helping us achieve our mission of restoring the grasslands of the world. And what's important to us and what Savory Institute has set out to do is to facilitate the realization of a life of enduring returns for the land and those who depend on it. To do that from Boulder, Colorado is a very hard task to do because the lands are out there all over the world. Therefore, our global network is in charge of that across the globe. So here represented, we have land managers from around the world. We have around 20 countries represented from 5 continents. Our hub leaders, and you'll learn about the hub strategy, the idea of these entrepreneurs all over the world doing this work in their own context, their own culture, their own social, cultural, political conditions, and those are the most effective entrepreneurs and partners that will make things happen, working with farmers, working with ranchers, making sure that this transition to start probably fixing what is wrong with agriculture and taking the best of what we know of agriculture and starting building our soils and putting grasslands to work. And that is the theme of our conference, putting grasslands to work all the way from sunshine, through soils, through plants, through animals, through people, through markets, through consumers. So all of us play a very, very important role. So thank you to all of you. Some of you are guest speakers. I think it's amazing the caliber of the speakers we have here. And I'm so grateful for you for taking the time to come and share all your expertise and knowledge with all of us, because it's about having these conversations that will take us where we need to go. Most importantly, all of you are good friends, and we're united here by a good cause and purpose, and so let's try to make the best out of this time together. We're delighted to be associated with all of you. Europe is a very new territory for the Savory Institute. So for the past 6-8 months, as we were reaching out to farmers and organizations here in the UK, there were 2 main things that we heard people say. One is, why London? The second one was, who is the Savory Institute? So we had 2 things against us to begin with. So I would like to address why London, and I would like to, apart from being an amazing, beautiful, rich, full of tradition and history country, so lovely. I love England and the city, so wonderful. But apart from that, that didn't have anything to do with my choice. We decided London for 2 main drivers, 2 main reasons. One is the fact that we have a global network that is all over the world. So if we keep on doing everything in the United States, we're missing all the other side of the world. We're making it hard for the other side to come and join in this conversation. So we have now 3 hubs in Europe and 5 hubs in Africa. And we have 2 special projects, one in China, one in the UAE. And so we thought it's sort of strategic and relatively easy to get to London. We forgot that it's quite expensive to be in London, but at least people could get here. So that was one of the drivers. So we're committed to shift sides of the world every year to serve our different constituencies in both all over the world. The second driver was to be in a city, and the reason for that is that we believe a lot at the core of a lot of the disconnect that exists between agriculture and the signals we get from the cities is the fact that we don't talk to each other. We're truly disconnected. We don't know what happens on the land. And the people on the land really are not able to inform what happens in the cities. And in the cities, we have this large concentration of our population, our consumers making choices and voting every day with their fork and with their money. We have opinion formers, we have the media, we have research, universities, education. We live in a very progressive town where the headquarters of the Savory Institute are based in Boulder, Colorado. And we have meatless Mondays, and we have a lot of, and this is very progressive, very educated, and we have open space surrounding us that is degrading, that is burning every year with wildfires, spending huge amount of money in weed control and whatnot, and there are no options, and there are options. So the problem is we're not talking to each other. So flows of money that could be put into the right type of agriculture, signals from policies, from markets, from consumers, from everything needs to be aligned to then create the incentives for farmers to be incentivized to catalyze that shift in practices, because it takes investment, it takes time, it takes changing habits, it takes risk. So that on the other side, there has to be something to facilitate that. And so these conversations we hope will facilitate that understanding of each other and what each other needs to make this work. So that's why we're choosing cities, and we'll learn if this was a good idea or not. And next year, we'll see where we are. So who is the Savory Institute? The second question. Savory Institute is a young organization, but is standing on the work of 50 years of people on the land, and Alan's work and other organizations that have moved holistic management to where we are today. Savory Institute was founded 6 years ago. The purpose was to turn a little bit the conversation to a more large scale restoration, more entrepreneurial restoration of the world's grasslands through our global network. So very grassroots, but at the same time having the conversations at the policy, the science, and the market levels that will facilitate that realization of those enduring returns that we're seeking, social, economic, and ecological for all of us. So the strategy is bringing the hubs here to tell you the stories that we're trying to accomplish, and the good work that is being done out there. And most of all, we would like this to be a very relaxed forum for having these conversations. Enthusiastic, honest, open, full of curiosity, safe and friendly, respectful. Feel free, this idea is provocative, a lot of different thoughts here. I'm not sure how much we belong to the same choir here, but conversations will happen and views will be exchanged, and that's what we want to happen. So we have a super packed program. Thank you again to all our guest speakers. We'll get to listen to them and enjoy. And thank you again for being here. We're super delighted. And let's get the program rolling.
Thank you again, Daniela. So good morning, everyone. That's like a half good morning. There's a lot of jet-lagged people I can see. So one more time. Good morning.
Good morning.
Oh, my name also. This is fantastic. All right, so good morning, everyone. So as a bit of background here, we would like this to be more of a discussion. You'll see on the placard here, putting grasslands to work, join the conversation. So we would like to get your voices in the room as part of that, and I know that in a room full of hundreds of people, sometimes it's hard to do in real time. But as part of that, we've got this Twitter hashtag, Savory, CONF, and we'd like to invite you to bring your voice into there as well as during the sessions of discussion as well. So we'll be periodically reminding you, and we'd like to bring that conversation into what's happening up here as well. So I'd love to make sure that we keep plugging that. I'm just going to make a couple of logistical points, and then we'll move on to this morning's keynote. The first of which is, so you're all wearing name cards right now. On the back of the name card and inside of the name card, you will see the program for the day. This program is also going to be reflected when you go out into the foyer. There's foyer A over here and foyer B over here. There's a massive big screen in both cases where you'll see all of the breakout sessions, all of the overall sessions for the day. And on the back of this lanyard, you're going to see a color-coded approach to how you can find those breakout sessions. So the top organizational map that you'll see is referring to floor 1. So this is a little bit complicated, so I'm going to ask you to bear with me. So in this hotel, we are on B2, which is basement. Then you have the lobby floor, which is how you enter into the hotel. And then you have floor 1, which is one floor above the lobby. So this conference is going to be taking place in B2 and floor 1, not the lobby. And what you'll see here is the top point on your lanyard in the back side of it is what is on floor 1. And the bottom map is on B2. You'll notice that it's all color-coded with the colors at the bottom. And if you go outside, you'll find that each session will have this same color coding. So whichever session you'd like to attend, that color, just check it out on your map here, and then either head to floor 1 or floor B2, depending on which option. Make sense? Awesome. Second comment I wanted to share, on these name cards themselves, we'd like to also facilitate the conversations that we'd like to be having in the next couple days. You have this open space, you can write whatever you want on it, and we'd like to encourage you to do so. So think of a question, the question that you're holding that brings you here, the conversation that you'd like to have, whether that's a topic, or perhaps it is a question, or perhaps it's your organization, or perhaps it's your geography. Whatever you feel compelled to be sharing, go ahead and write that down. Hopefully it can help facilitate some of the conversations we'll have in the next 2 days. A couple of technology comments. So if you're also interested in checking out more details on the conference schedule, we have Wi-Fi access, and on your tablet or smartphone or laptop, you can access that schedule at london.savoryinstitute.org. And if you have any questions on that, just find me as we go into break sessions. We're also live streaming this entire conference. So there's hundreds of people or thousands of people, I don't know how many people, but the response is actually quite positive, and you should have received an email about this as well, so you may want to forward that along if others in your network are interested in live streaming this whole webcast. The last piece that I want to share is about the nature of the schedule. So we've got just an amazing lineup of people. I was meeting some of these folks yesterday and feeling like, some people go to rock concerts and say, wow, I can't believe I'm meeting Bono. I don't know if I'm dating myself. And for me, this is like going and meeting movie stars. And we actually have movie stars here. And so we're going to have that opportunity on this stage as the days go, today and tomorrow. And so because of that, the schedule is a little bit packed, although we do have plenty of breaks filled in. And the reason I mention that is that as we come towards the end of breaks, I'm going to start announcing. We've got 5 minutes left before we come back in, and we'd really like to encourage mindfulness to bring us all back at that time, just to be mindful of the speakers, given the timing that we have together. And there's one more piece that I wanted to share on the direction of holistic management and my own relationship with it. So when I first came across Alan Savory and holistic management, this was about 5 years ago, we met on the Grasslands in South Dakota. And we were looking at all of this beautiful rangeland that was at the beginning stages of being rehabilitated. And Alan looks at us and he says, you know, it's not about the land. It's about our decision making. It's about how we think. And the group that I was with looked at him and we smiled and we said, I have no idea what you're talking about. But the land looks awesome. And it took years, at least in my case, and we started to come around. We started looking at what he was saying and saying, wow, we really agree with you. But why did it take us 2 years, 3 years, or in some cases, when we look around at society, many more? And that's actually been a question that I've been asking myself a lot over these last few years. And in that research, I have found a lot of science, a whole world of science that's speaking to this question: what is it that keeps the mindsets stagnating in our society? This world of science, you can call it the world of well-being, the world of mindfulness. All these people are asking questions: what does it take to start shifting minds? And we're finding that it's not just an intellectual understanding of some of these topics, it's a practice. When you start practicing new skills of shifting one's perception, things start to shift externally as a result of that. So that's been an interesting learning for me, and we started sharing it with the Savory Institute and some of the other organizations that I work with, and we found a lot of uptake, a lot of interest, places and changes that we didn't see possible because you can only see what you can see, and then all of a sudden you take on small practices and you see things a little bit differently. So one story comes to mind that I wanted to share. There's this gentleman who I came across about a year ago. His name's Mike Geller. Mike is operating an organic farm and delivery service in Connecticut. And for the last several years, he's what you'd call a social entrepreneur. He's doing wonderful things in the world. He's doing wonderful things for the land. And he's also interested in this question: what does it take to shift his own perception? What does it take to shift the perceptions of his constituency? And so he started with what we call a 21-day kindness challenge, which is something that a small group of us came up with. It sounds so pithy, a kindness challenge, my God. And we're all kind, are you kidding? And yet, he was a sport about it. He said, look, if you're going to the gym to become stronger, you want to have something to focus on the inner side as well. So he said, look, I'm going to take 2 minutes a day, and I'm going to figure out how can I push my boundaries of personal shift, with kindness in this case. So he goes through a week of this, and he says, well, one thing I'm going to start doing is I'm going to start talking to my customers a little bit more. That's an act of kindness. I just want to create a connection. He gets to day 15, and he says, you know, I'm really excited to meet new people, new customers, and develop relationships there. So he shows up to a new customer's place. He's delivering this food as well as growing it. And when he shows up, he has this conversation, a first-time customer, and it turns out that she has stage 3 cancer. And so he's just touched. He's like, I'm really interested why you're ordering this organic food. There's some really deep reasons why she is. And he feels so moved. He says, you know, I haven't done my act of kindness for the day. It's just the permission that he was looking for. And he said, you know, I have this $75 tub of vegetables that I would just like to gift you. And I'd like to do that because it's my opportunity to shift my own perception of relationship and building real wealth. Community is real wealth, just like soil is real wealth. And she freaked out. She started to cry. Not only because of the gesture itself, but because a business isn't allowed to do that. We're not supposed to think in that way. Our humanity isn't supposed to come out, apparently. And my friend Mike, he also started to tear up, and he said, you know, I've actually never drove home from a customer visit as happy, joyful of my process of being in business as that particular day. And I felt like that enough made it worthwhile. But it gets better. So then he gets home that night, and he checks his email, and this first-time customer writes him, and she says, you know, I don't really know how much longer I have left, given my situation. But every week for the rest of my life, you can count on my order, because this is the kind of world that I want to see. This is what I want to live in. And so I wanted to bring a little bit of that into this gathering that we have here together for a couple days. There's a couple ways that we'd like to try that. The first is with the practice of mindfulness. The idea of mindfulness is to create the conditions where we start to see things in a new way, just like Mike went through. So periodically throughout the day, we're going to just invite a minute, maybe 90 seconds, of grounding ourselves in a practice of mindfulness. And just as a bit of background for those who may not be familiar, this is not an esoteric practice. Most of us do it anyways without necessarily knowing. It's the idea of being present in this moment right now, non-judgmentally. just being here. And it's amazing how this practice can facilitate holistic decision-making when scaled up. The second practice that we'd like to offer is this practice of kindness. So we're here for the next 2 days. There's a million ways to be kind. You don't have to give out a $75 box of vegetables. It could be a warm smile. It could be your attentive listening to me, which I feel in this moment and I'm grateful for. And I'd love to create spaces where that can be shared. So tomorrow we may actually create a space where we can share our own experience of what happens if we push our boundaries, if we give ourselves permission in this gathering to say, what does that mean? To try to push where I'm going with my relationship to personal perception and well-being. So I appreciate your attention and your listening. I would love to invite this morning's keynote speaker. You probably know of him. His name is Alan Savory. He is the founder of Holistic Management. He, as Daniela was saying, he's created or came up with the concept about 50 years ago now. I'm thinking of the small stories that I find myself most moved by in connection with him. So the first time that I met him in a city, it was in New York City, and we were walking around Midtown Manhattan together. And as we were walking, he casually mentioned to me, "What time did you get up, Birju?" And I'm not an early riser, so I mentioned something like 8 o'clock or something, and he started chuckling a little bit. And I just shared, I was really curious how I can grow in that journey. He's saying, well, being an early riser is really important, and waking up at, I think, 4 or 4:30 that day, he went out for a jog in Central Park barefoot in the city. And I was so moved by that, the idea that doing small things, the character lasts at every moment, regardless of where you are. And I find that so moving about Alan the teacher as well as Alan the practitioner. So please join me in welcome Alan Savory to the stage.
Thanks, Bridget. I don't remember that. Is this mic on? Yeah. Well, welcome, everybody. It's wonderful to see you all here, and we deeply appreciate how far some of you have come from taking the effort to do so. I'll get right into things now. We live in a very troubled world if you watch the news daily, but almost all of the troubles, if you listen carefully, are associated with violence and deteriorating environment. And when we look at how people respond to that, we see some just opt out and join their friends at the soccer or in the pub. Others get very caught up on it, don't know what to do, just get on with life. Others just totally absorbed in their iPhones and toys. And some just make money and carry on making money while the band plays, while others do the best they can in any way that they see hope. So it's really a very confusing situation that we see around this troubled world. Now, at this conference, we want to start breaking through that and just getting practical and very simple with where we go. Over 100 years ago, Remy de Gaumont, I think his name is pronounced, made this statement: very simple ideas lie within the reach only of complex minds. So I want to talk about very simple ideas in this confusing situation, and you're going to see we'll come down to profound simplicity. But I'd like to start with an aim. Where are we going? And so let's start with an aim or a dream I have and a dream I think that we all share. And then we'll go on from that to a simple idea of how we might bring this about. The dream I have is that we will shortly achieve a unity of team humanity, our nations, our cultures, living in harmony with one another and our environment in a world in which all land, rivers, lakes, oceans are teeming with life, a healthy planet. And I believe we all share that dream. So if I can call that our dream, I'd like to get down to how we might begin to bring that about together. I think it's very fitting that this conference this year is in London, which is one of the great melting pots of humanity, and many, many fine ideals for the world have emerged from this city. So I think it's a very fitting place to be talking. Now, as I scan your faces, what I can see against the light, I see that I'm talking to a very small choir of people that think similarly. I see some of you, well, all of you believe in regenerative agriculture in some form. I see some of you in this room are farming in very kind environments with relatively reliable rainfall. Others of you are practicing agriculture in some of the harshest environments in the world with very erratic and low rainfall. Now, in many ways, I wish I wasn't talking to just a small choir of people thinking like we do. I would love it if I could be speaking to almost all of the people in London and many of our other big cities in the world, because today they control our fate. It is no good going on talking amongst ourselves in rural areas. All of the political power, all of the economic power has shifted to the cities, and that is what controls our fate. We will not control it from the rural areas. So I hope that we'll get this message out more and more to city people, because not only do they control our fate, but they are the ones that are going to suffer the most if we do not change our ways. The suffering in the cities is going to be far worse than anything in rural environments. Now, in our daily lives, lots of things are going well when we watch the stock markets or go to overflowing malls, as I say, attend soccer games or go to the pub with our friends. But one thing vital to everybody is not going well. In fact, it's going horribly wrong, and that is agriculture. Now, millions of people in our cities, in our universities, parliaments, etc., are assured by economists that agriculture is not very important because it's only a small percentage of GDP. Now, how true is this? If we think about it, without agriculture, we couldn't have an orchestra, a museum, a school, a university. We couldn't have any manufacturing, any mining industry. We would have no banks, no economy, no army, no government. The food and clothing we're all in that maintains people in our cities, that's the lubricant that keeps society going. Where would all this come from? Agriculture is the very basis and foundation of everything we aspire to be, of everything we're trying to do, of our civilizations. Now, asked what agriculture is, most people in our cities and many in the rural areas would say it's crop production. Now, frankly, agriculture is far more than crop production. It is the production of food and fiber from the world's land and waters. So when we look at fisheries, forestry, wildlife, wool, honey, all of these things, these are all agriculture, providing the food and fiber to sustain our cities, where most of our population is now. And if we look at agriculture in that broader context, it is using up almost all of the planet's surface now, is engaged in agriculture. And if we take the entire planet's area and we look at the proportion of it that is actually arable land under crop production, it's 5%. So what we're focusing on, most people, as agriculture, is only 5% of the globe's area that we're using to sustain our cities mainly now. Now, how deep is the understanding of this? Some time ago, I got Alan Greenspan's 500-page book and read it, and hoping that as the former federal Reserve Bank chairman that he would show some understanding of the importance of agriculture in the economy. And in that entire book, I think I found the word agriculture once. It's incredible. Now, how assured are we that agriculture is serving us well when we look at it right now? And I'm going through some of the stuff to set the scene. This is not a doomsday talk. I'll remind you of that a couple of times. So when we look at how agriculture is serving us, we need roughly 0.5 ton of food per year for a healthy human. How are we doing with agriculture? We're producing that, but we're also producing over 75 billion tons of dead eroding soil. Now, that's 10 tons of eroding soil, roughly, for every human alive. Now, I believe this is one of the most important statistics in the world. So let's get it straight. Needing about 0.5 ton of food, we're producing roughly 20 times as much dead eroding soil as the food we need. It's incredible. And that diminishing resource is going to be expected to sustain another roughly 3 billion people, it is estimated, before things might level out. Now, not only this, but agriculture is leading to lifeless oceans, to the expansion of global desertification, the dumping of millions of people into city slums and drowning, trying to reach Europe now. Some cities are getting it. Beijing is getting, in some days, up to 250,000 tons of sand dumped on the city in a day. Frankly, nature wins these battles. And without any change in weather yet, we're seeing increasing droughts, floods, poverty, social breakdown, new diseases, violence, pastoral genocide, ideal recruitment for Al-Qaeda and other antisocial organizations in the most problematic regions of the world. And all of that is taking place while agriculture is putting carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and black carbon into the air from billions of acres or millions of hectares of grassland burning every year, and millions of acres or hectares of periodic forest burning. All of this is adding to the situation. We're beginning to face wars over water that will be worse than over oil, and it's causing climate change. So really, agriculture is the most destructive industry we have in the world, by far more destructive than mining or anything else we can see. Nothing is destroying the environment at that pace, and clearly we've got to do something about it. Now, as I said, despite this grim picture of where we are, this is not a doomsday talk. Nor is it a talk about what we need to do, without how to do it. I have read so many books saying this is what we need to do, this is what we need to do, but nothing about how to do it. And we just go on repeating that. So we're going to get down to some brass tacks of how to actually achieve and realize our dream. Now, I'm not going to talk about the role of livestock much, because other speakers during the conference will be doing so, and it's the main theme, as you know, of the conference is to focus on our grasslands. So while this is the main theme and represents the main thrust of this conference, that is the main thrust of our Institute's strategy. But there is another arm of our strategy towards achieving our dream, and I'm going to use this opportunity to talk about that. And that involves removing the barriers, facilitating the change in our institutions so that agricultural policies can change and not just practices on the ground, because it is the policies that are coming from the cities and not from the rural areas. So unless we can change that, we're not going to be able to achieve our dream. Now, before I jump into this second arm of our strategy, of how to realize our dream, I want to give a little more background. A few weeks ago, I read a report from an international team of scientists, mathematicians, philosophers at a group here in Oxford, Future of Humanities Institute. And they laid out 5 of the greatest dangers to human survival. And one of those 5 was not climate change. It was not one of the 5 greatest dangers. And they explained why. They said it was not one of the 5 great dangers because some parts of the planet would still be inhabitable. Think about that for a moment. Just imagine that. What does that mean for all the people in a city like London if it's not one of those regions that's habitable? Please believe me, the greatest sufferings are going to take place in the city, and we've got to take it a lot more seriously than that. Now, although if we have to abandon some of our cities, although that might well happen if we don't change our ways, it'll not be a new experience. All that will be new is the scale. We have abandoned cities, I think, more than 20 times in history in all regions of the world as they failed. So it's not a new experience to us, but it will be on this scale. Now, Rebecca Costa, who studied that, wrote the book The Watchman's Rattle, Thinking Our Way Out of Extinction. And what she came to the conclusion was that those past cities that failed didn't do so simply because of their agriculture failing. They did so because their societies could not deal with the declining environment, deteriorating environment, and rising population. The complexity of that their societies could not deal with, so they shifted away from knowledge or science, their version of science in those days, towards faith, religion, and sacrifices in many of their cases, and they shelved the problems for future generations to deal with. Does that sound similar to something we're doing today? I believe it does, just on a bigger scale now. Now, John Ralston Saul, who studied the similar problems, wrote the best-selling book Voltaire's Bastards, is well worth reading. It's 500 pages of very deep stuff, but incredible. I can see it why it was a bestseller. And what he was studying was the situation that brought about the Age of Enlightenment, Age of Reason, where up to that time in the world there had been some major blunders, and these were attributed to amateurism. The people could buy or inherit their positions in the army or a company or whatever it was, in organizations, and they were amateurs, and so they were going to have no more of that. From that time on, we were only going to have people leading and managing organizations who were highly professional, skilled, trained, and Napoleon brought that into Europe more than any other leader. Well, what Saul studied was said, well, what happened then? Did the blunders decrease? And what he found, looking across all manner of professions and areas of our lives, was far from decreasing. The blunders became greater and more frequent under expert management. So something strange was going on there. Now, he attributed that mainly to our whole education and training system being too narrow, expert, siloed education. So I'll actually quote him. He says, "The reality is that the division of knowledge into feudal fiefdoms of expertise has made general understanding and coordinated action not simply impossible, but despised and distrusted." And he goes on to point out that the jargon in our siloed education is not designed to communicate better. It's designed to protect each profession from criticism by others. And I'll quote him again. "In many ways, the difference between various languages today are less profound than the differences between the professional dialects within each language. Any reasonably diligent person can learn one or two extra tongues, but the dialect of the accountant, the doctor, the political scientist, economist, literary historian, or bureaucrat is available only to those who become one. And I think many of us can recognize that. So we've got two situations here. Costa believing we couldn't deal with the complexity, Saul believing the problem is due to our siloed training. Now, clearly, if we're going to achieve our dream, we have to address whatever this is, this complexity that is around us. Now, if we're going to address complexity, what does that word mean? We bandy it around. What does it mean to you and me? I've found an easy way to explain it that anyone can understand. Think of everything we make, everything that's in this room. The speaker I'm using, the glasses I'm using, the clothing you're wearing, everything in this room. Think about it. And everything is made. Something we make, everything in this room involves technology and fire, without which you couldn't have even made the clothing you have. And everything in this room has something else in common, and that is, it is interconnecting parts, doesn't work if a part is broken. In other words, it's not self-organizing. They do what they're designed to do, our clothing or a watch or anything else, and it's defined as complicated in the jargon of system science. All right, so I don't even have the technical capability to make a watch, being an example. If a part is missing, it doesn't work. All right, so think outside this room to space exploration of the bridges, the whole of the city, the boats, the ships, everything, the planes that brought you here, everything that we make, and it's complicated. It's got interconnecting parts, it's a mechanical sort of thinking that we've had, and they don't work essentially if a part is missing. Now, think of everything we do not make, but we manage. Global finance, global economy, nature, agriculture, international and religious relationships, your garden, our lives, on and on and on. Think of everything we manage. And here it is where we're running into trouble. Not with the things we make. Those are getting ever more amazing. But when we look at what we manage is where we're running into increasing trouble. And we have done for thousands of years, resulting in terrible wars, environmental destruction, and culminating now in failing agriculture and climate change, as we're talking about, threatening our very survival. Now, every one of these things we manage, again, has something in common. Everything there hasn't got interconnecting parts. It's functioning in wholes and patterns, and it's self-renewing. Now, there are a lot of other properties that I won't go into. That's enough for now, is we're self-renewing, and that's defined as complex. So the complexity that we have to deal with is all entailed in management, where we have self-renewing organizations. If a chairman dies, the organization doesn't stop. You replace the chairperson. If a fish species is exterminated in the ocean, everything doesn't die, but it carries on in very changed form. But life carries on, but in changed form. All right, so a game of chess is not complex. It's complicated. A computer is complicated. It's not complex. Agriculture and our institutions are complex, because human organizations are complex. Now, in history, if we look at history and our global experience, and if that teaches us anything, it is that to address complexity is what we need to learn how to do. And it's very hard to imagine any more pressing need than that, this need to address complexity throughout agriculture and everything else. And I would say that's our Achilles heel that we need to address. We've got to somehow solve that problem. And that problem is not going to be solved with any technology. It's going to be solved with our minds it's an issue we have to think about. Now let me come to how profoundly simply I believe we might begin to address this Achilles heel of ours if we're going to reach our dream of unity on a thriving planet. When so much goes so wrong, and it has done so over thousands of years, as has been happening to us, and we've had millions and millions of brilliant minds, what does it suggest? Frankly, it suggests some sort of systemic problem, that this is probably flowing, what is happening is probably flowing from some common cause and not a whole series of individual causes. Now, some years ago, Jody and I were in Sweden at an international conference being addressed by Gro Harlem Brundtland. She was Prime Minister of Norway, and she was a UN Special Envoy and also Vice Chair of a group of wise people that they called the Elders. And at that conference, she outlined many of the things facing the world and explained how we were spending millions of dollars on this problem, billions of dollars on that problem, and so on, and all was getting worse, not better. And she appealed to us as scientists to try to see the connections, because if we could see the connections between them, we might see the causes and be able to do better. Well, in the weeks following that, I wrote a number of the problems out on cards, droughts, locusts, failing cities, whatever it was, floods, and so on and so forth, and try to play with them and see the connections. And I couldn't find the connections. What I eventually found was they were all connected outside of them at one point. So if you can picture 100 cards down on the floor representing big problems that we're facing, there are no lines connecting them. Those are very shallow. It's as though there was a light up here shining a beam down onto each one, and it's up here that they were connecting. So they were connecting at one point outside of them. Now, that was enlightening, because that meant we did have then one possible source. So let's talk about this single light or common cause that I realized was connecting them. And this is really the genetically embedded way we make management decisions. And it is genetically embedded, as I'll explain. It's been with us since the cave days. We probably didn't discover it hundreds of years ago because of its profound simplicity. You're going to find it so simple. So while we appear to make decisions in many, many ways, dictatorially, democratically, intuitively, and so on, scientifically, and so on, if you look at these fundamentally, you find no, we all are using one simple process. We have an objective, we use some tools, and we make the decision on one or more of many factors. So we'll have an objective, we'll use some tool, because we're a tool-using animal, and then many factors will make up the decision. Now, we can recognize that through all tool-using animals, that very, very profoundly simple situation. So let me give you an example. We want to reach the moon. Objective. We're going to use the tool of technology. How are we going to make the decisions? Past experience, research results, expert opinion, cash flow, cost, political compromises, all sorts of things will come into it, and we'll make the decisions on what technology to use, and we get to the moon. We want to grow corn. Objective. Now, we're going to use technology, insecticides, herbicides, a plow, fertilizer, whatever farmers are going to use. How do you make the decision? Well, past experience, talk to a neighbor, research results, expert advice, cost, cash flow, whatever, profitability, and we take that action. So it doesn't matter what situation we look at, always it's objective, tools, and one or more of many factors. Now, we can recognize that all the way through from the most sophisticated management to the profoundly simple situation with other tool-using animals. So an otter has an objective of breaking a shell to get the shellfish out. It uses a stone as a tool. How does it make the decision? Past experience, learning from another otter, parents teaching the young otter, etc. It's a genetically embedded way we do things, so now you see why we call it that. So why has this way of achieving our objectives enabled us to develop the amazing technology and things we can do today and getting smarter and smarter, but it's run us into trouble when we deal with complexity? So what is in that genetic way of ours? There are two simple flaws in it that we needed to correct, and once we correct them, things become different. And these two flaws were, first, amongst the tools we use, there wasn't any tool that could prevent about 2/3 of the world's land turning to desert. So we were missing a tool. Now that we will be talking about, it'll be much of the theme of this conference, why we had to bring in livestock properly managed as a tool, without which we cannot stop desertification, we cannot reverse it. As scientists, we behave as though we've got thousands of tools. We don't. We actually, if you look at it very strictly, we cannot do anything without a tool. I can't even drink this water unless I went to the Thames and drank with my mouth and my hands without using a glass, which is technology. Everything we do is involving some tool. Now, we don't have thousands of them. We actually have two. We have technology in all its forms, and we have fire. And fire made the technology able to advance beyond sticks and stones long ago. And then we have the concept of resting the environment to let biodiversity recover, let the land recover. So we call that a tool. So there they are. Those are the ones for managing our environment at large. So we understand now that we were missing a tool, and that will be covered a lot during this conference. So now let's look at the other flaw, and as I do so, I'll do it with policies in mind, because unless those change, we're not going to be able to achieve our dream. And turning to religion, faith, and shelving the problem for future generations didn't work for past civilizations, and it won't work for us. We're going to have to get more realistic. All right, so when we look at our policies, they all have objectives, like all of our actions do. And that's what they are designed to do, achieve objectives. Developing policies is the number one role of governments, our governments. And there is no other reason you develop a policy except to deal with a problem or a perceived problem. And so when we look at these objectives of policies, we find that they need a context. All objectives need a context, a why, the circumstances, why are you doing it, what are the circumstances, what is the context. Now, so common are unintended consequences that many of the sciences and the humanities talk about the law of unintended consequences. And that's a humorous reminder to us to be more humble when we're dealing with the world, because they are around us all of the time. So let's look at an example. I have an objective of lighting a fire right now. Should I? You have no idea, unless you ask me why. What is the context? What are the circumstances? And if there's a fireplace here and it's cold in here, it makes sense. If I'm going to light it on the carpet, obviously we're going to have unintended consequences. And so it is with every single objective in management and in policies. So think about this for yourself for a moment. Look at any agricultural policy objectives, no matter how trivial or great, and you will realize that those objectives need a context. Now, We don't think like that. We don't talk like that. We don't question it. We don't question the context, because in policy, it is almost always so obvious what the context is. So obvious that we wouldn't want to appear foolish by even questioning it. And if you think about it in agriculture or with drugs or terrorism or any policy, the context is always the problem. We've got a drug policy because kids are taking too many drugs. We've got an anti-terrorist policy or whatever it is because of terrorism. So it goes on. And you'll see that all the way through, whether it's immigration, health, education, anything else. This is the feature of policies. Now, there's no question we need policies. They are not the problem. It is the way we develop them. Just like we discovered that cattle and livestock were not the problem. It was the way we managed them was the problem. So it is with policies. We're going to have policies. We need them. They're not the problem. The way we manage them is the problem. Now, to succeed, the objectives of any policy need to meet three criteria. They need to be having full public support. Your ideal is to have full public support for policies. They need to address the underlying cause of the problem, not the symptoms. And they need a context greater than the problem, what we call a holistic context, and I'll come to that for some of you that it might be new. I'll explain it in a moment. So again, think about it for a moment. Could any policy imaginable in agriculture, drugs, terrorism, saving charismatic species of animals, pandas or rhino or whatever, climate change, immigration, could any policy conceivable not have economic consequences or implications, not have environmental implications, not have social, cultural implications? It's absolutely impossible to even imagine a policy that doesn't have implications right across these fields. But today, it would be difficult indeed to find any agricultural policy, or for that matter, one to save endangered species or drugs or terrorism or anything like that, that has full public support. It's very rare indeed. We often have conflicts there. Very difficult to find one that is not dealing with symptoms. Almost all are dealing with symptoms, and very difficult to find those that wouldn't lead to unintended consequences. So these three ideals we're not meeting in almost every situation as we look at it today. Now, can we do better? I believe we can. If we can face the fact that it's the way we develop them, and we can develop policies holistically, then I believe we can do much better, but it will always depend on the depth and breadth of thinking, the intellectual, emotional intelligence of the people doing it and designing those policies, obviously. But I think we have a better way. So what then does developing a policy holistically mean? How would that be different from what we're doing today with our most sophisticated governments, with integrated teams of specialists, scientists, whatever, economists working? After all, they're fully aware that there are political implications, economic implications, social implications. So how would it be different to develop a policy holistically? Surely they're doing that. No, they're not. Now, let me try and explain that. I don't know, we don't have a word for it, but when you think about bringing, it doesn't matter how many people you bring together, how much expertise, if they are designing a policy and you have reduced the context of that policy to the problem, then the word reductionist comes to mind. I cannot think of any other word. So it doesn't matter how sophisticated the team doing it, it comes down to reductionist policy because you've reduced the context to the problem. Now, I believe there, very simply, lies that core, underlying cause of almost all the problems we're facing today. is just the way we were developing our management policies. And no culture or nation is immune from what I'm talking about. So what would developing a policy in a holistic context look like? How would that look? Well, first, what is a holistic context? That is unique to every situation. It has to be developed by the people in that situation. And so and there are guidelines to doing that, and we won't deal with that today. But what I'd like to do is give you a feel for what it looks like. And so I'll read out here a generalized holistic context. It's one I use commonly when I'm reading the newspapers, talking to people, visit a strange country or anything. I get a very quick feel for where things are going because I just have this in my mind. So let me read this to you and you'll see, because I think most people in the world would share this. So it would go like this. We want stable families, living peaceful lives in prosperity and physical security, while free to pursue our own spiritual and religious beliefs, adequate nutritious food and clean water, enjoying good education and health in balanced lives with time for family, friends and community, and leisure for cultural and other pursuits, all to be ensured for many generations to come on a foundation of regenerating soils and biologically diverse community on Earth's land and in her rivers, lakes, and oceans. And I think most humans would aspire to that. That now gives a generalized context, not the problems. Now, does this work, developing policies in that way? Yes, it works amazingly well. Now, although we have had no government do so yet at a higher level, we have had governments engaged at a lower level in workshops. Now, for example, in the United States, many years ago, far-sighted people in the US Department of Agriculture engaged me over a 2-year period to put some 2,000 officials through training from land-grant colleges, main land management agencies, and the World Bank. And they came through a week of training, about 25 to 30 people at a time, and we used the holistic framework to analyze and look at policies and see how to develop them and so on. Now, they brought their own policies to those workshops. They brought hundreds of policies covering everything you can imagine, droughts, floods, fires, small towns failing, all sorts of things. And they could not find a single policy that would meet its objectives and would not lead to unintended consequences because the context was too simple in each case. And they could easily see that using a holistic context, a workable policy was possible. And one group actually got into extended discussion, and they made a statement that I often quote, because to me it's the most important one in the whole of our original textbook, and they said they could now recognize that unsound resource management was universal in the United States. And I think that's very significant when people can recognize that after just a week of training. Now, really, I believe that applies all over. It's not a monopoly that America's got. So repeating that with smaller samples in India, Lesotho, major NGO once in Kenya, we consistently get the same result, but smaller samples. Now, until a government develops policies on a relative holistic context in any country, we're going to be able to do no better than know what is possible. We won't get real-life case studies until a government is actually doing that. So, but I think this example from a high number of people shines light on the situation that we're facing and a way that we can achieve our dream. Now, how long will it take before a government is actually doing that and developing policies in a holistic context for any nation? We don't know how long that will take, but what we do know is that the length of time that that takes will depend on you, not on any government. That will depend on the public. Now, I say that because studying this problem over so many years and battling with it, I did not understand, particularly when I was in Parliament, I didn't understand why it was so difficult to move any institution on a new direction. And I only really finally understood that when I read the work of Lord Eric Ashby, a British scientist, who studied Britain and America over the last 200 years as his case study, and looked at how truly new, counterintuitive scientific insights get into institutions in our democracies. And in essence, what he found was that our institutions cannot act on new, counterintuitive information that is not in the societal view, yet a prevalent view. So they cannot act until society's view changes, then they can act. And he expressed it that finally government can only act when people at the cricket ground or in the pub or are saying, when the hell are they going to do something, then they can finally act. And you see this over and over again. The number of people criticizing, for example, President Obama for not acting on climate change, he can't. He's doing the most he can until public opinion is overwhelming, then you can act in a democracy. So we've got a real difficulty there, and we just need to face it, that if it is new, counterintuitive knowledge, if we study it from Galileo on, our institutions actually act as the last resistance to it until there's sufficient public opinion change, and then it changes. So let's not try and defy the research and hundreds of years of experience. We need to face that. All right, before concluding now, I want to talk about one other way that managing holistically will help to unite us and bring us together, I believe. Now, right now, we have many of us engaged in, let me call it regenerative agriculture, the different organizations and people believing in that. We're a very small minority, all right? Essentially, we're the people that are facing the fact that agriculture needs to be based on the biological sciences, and we're probably 3 or 5%, if that. And then you've got a massive people out there, 90-something%, where agriculture is based, if you look at it critically, on chemistry and smart use of technology and faulty economic principles, and that's what we're facing out there. Now, where are we at the policy table? We're not even at the table. We're not even anywhere near it. Now, partly we have ourselves to blame for this. Why? Because in our different organizations, we are beginning to collaborate now. A lot of us are together at this conference. We were last year. We're beginning to collaborate. That's wonderful. But in our different organizations, didn't we all have objectives? Weren't our objectives, what was the context? What were we working toward? We were like everybody else. And if you look at it carefully, whether you're looking at trying to save endangered species or the agricultural groups, we've got our different organizations, and we all got our own outreach and everything else. We're all vying for validity. We're competing for limited funds and wanting the public to support us. Well, frankly, the ship is sinking. We're not even at the policy table. We need to face reality. If we're going to achieve our dream, policies have to change. How are we going to do that? Now, what if we face the reality that the politicians have to go with a major group? Policies have to go that way, and that's the reality of it. Everybody's following the Pied Piper. Now, what if we could turn that all around? If there was one simple idea, one simple way that we could turn that around, one unifying idea, that would even the playing field and get everybody at the policy table. What if we could do that? What if it was one idea that no scientist would argue, no farmer would argue, no politician would argue? What if we had one idea like that? And I think we can. If we could do that, we would not face the situation where David is trying to fight Goliath, as we have today. We'd have a situation, if we could turn it around and all come as equals to the policy table, where you'd have David and Goliath at Arthur's round table. And I think that's what we need to aim for. Now, that one idea is simply that policies and management needs to be holistic. Who can argue about that? It takes a little explaining, like people accept that E equals mc squared. I haven't a clue how to explain it, but people accept it. And people will come to accept and understand with a little explaining that policies and management need to be developed holistically, needs to be holistic. That we could unify around. That would bring us all to the table as equals. Once the public is supporting that, and politicians are then free to move with it in governments. Now, I was recently able to test this idea a bit in Zimbabwe, and we've got a very bad conflict situation there, but I had 35 members of parliament together for a brief workshop, and at that we looked at the land and agriculture policy, which is the most contentious issue in the country, explained the basics to them. Once we defined and developed a national holistic context, it switched from being two violently opposing political groups. Everything just soared above politics. Anybody who'd raised a political issue or a pressure group issue or a lobbyist group would have just felt foolish. Nobody did. Everything just soared above politics. Suddenly, it was just 35 Zimbabweans, a national holistic context. How do we do that? How do we bring that about? Agriculture in that context, not just the problems. And by the end of it, we had the nucleus of a policy the world dreams of. We'd be the first country in the history of the world producing more food than eroding soil. So I know what is possible and how amazingly easy it is. And that was the reaction we got from them. Two reactions. Immediate one, some anger mixed with sadness, saying, we've had so many people talk to us about policies in agriculture, land, etc., from United Nations, from universities, consultants. Nobody has ever made it so easy to do as this was. That was the one reaction. The other was, can we repeat this at cabinet level? So we are trying to set that up to do that at some time. Now, the change that came about there, a significant point, is that nothing that we came up with required research or further knowledge. We did nothing but use the knowledge we have today. Nothing but that. The knowledge that's in this room, the knowledge that's in our universities, in our corporations and so on, is amazing if we can address what was causing the problem. So I believe the picture I paint is possible in any government once we can encourage them to develop policies holistically through public support. So let's finish up now. I conclude bearing in mind the gravity of the situation, which I don't have to repeat to you, of agriculture in deep trouble and the global desertification that we're facing. Now, to achieve our dream of sustaining future generations on a healing planet, I believe it is possible. I believe we need to mold around one idea we can all support if people agree with me. And if we can get the framework we're talking into international consciousness, I believe we have a very, very good hope of achieving the future we want. Now, bringing that about is only going to happen, I think, because of public opinion. So as we forge ahead, I think we'll be using the social media and all of these things that we can. We in the Institute will be focusing on the grasslands as the main thrust of area, but also trying to remove the barriers. And I believe that the strategy we're following, I mentioned this last night, of the hubs that you're here involved in, is a very good one from which leadership will emerge and give us a springboard, or as Buckminster Fuller used to call it, a trim tab in each country, and places where we can all start collaborating, because it's going to have to be about synergy, collaboration, cutting the blaming, ending the anger. If we can't pull together and unite, goodness knows what's going to happen. And I think our hubs are going to do that, provide a place where we can be coming together, managing holistically, exchanging information. I won't go on with it because you'll be doing a lot of it at this conference and then following up in Zimbabwe. Now, each of us feels very small. Each of us feel we're insignificant and so on. Some of us may feel, I don't think many in this room, that some technology will come to our rescue. There's some think tank out there. There's some leader out there that is planning ahead for us. It doesn't exist. There's no Joan of Arc going to ride to our rescue. I've been to international conferences. I keep away from most of them, but I've been to some where we're discussing, or supposed to be discussing, serious global issues, and it's just a cacophony of sound. I think it's like picking up a telescope because you want to look clearly at the horizon. You pick up the telescope, look through it, and it's a kaleidoscope. You can't see further than this, just a mass of colors. It's just confusion. I think we can get beyond that with the simple ideas we've been talking about. Now, floods never start as floods. They begin as little drops of rain hitting dry earth, then damp earth, and then growing. I think you and I are those drops of rain, and we've got to just get communicating, collaborating, and swelling our voice until we get a flood of movement in our various countries. Now, I know each of you is doing your best, but the times and the future of your children and your grandchildren on beyond call for us to do even more. Like it or not, you are the leaders of this and going to be in various countries, leaders in this 11th hour, in this great endeavor to achieve our dream. So I would say enjoy the conference, and then let's go out and change the world, one person, one family, one community, one nation at a time. Have a great conference. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. That was wonderful. We now have a scheduled break until just about 20 minutes after the hour. About 5 minutes beforehand, you'll hear an announcement in the loudspeaker system to call everyone back. And while you're out there, if you do feel like having any conversation that you'd like to bring to the forefront, please take a look at some of the tweets that are already coming up. The hashtag is Savory, CONF. Thank you. We'll see you shortly.